The Ukrainian army is a very serious opponent. They really do know what they're doing, and they're going to fight. Russia looks like a perfect pyramid of power. You have to ask the question, how long can Russia sustain this unsuccessful war? The Ukrainians are willing to fight forever, and it also seems like the West is willing to sustain that fight for a long time. A break should come.
Hello, my name is Yulia Mendel. I am a Ukrainian journalist, and today I am talking to Stefan Korshak, who is a journalist too, my colleague, but at the same time, he used to serve for 4 years in OSCE, exactly in Donbas when it was occupied by Russians. Stefan, how do you live through this war? Did you leave the country? Did you stay in Ukraine? What was your experience?
I think my experience is the same as many Ukrainians. I really don't think that it's unique in what I've personally experienced. I've lived and worked in Ukraine for many years. My family is here. It became clear that the Russians were invading. We stayed in Kyiv for 2 days and then decided that it was not healthy for us to stay in Kyiv. My wife and daughter are here with me, or were at that time. And then we moved to relatives outside of Kyiv, Boyarka area, which started out to be quiet, and then after a while, it became less quiet. And
it's Kyiv region.
Yes, it is.
Kyiv region was terrible under Russians.
In the beginning, it was quite quiet and nice, but over time, of course, as everybody knows, the Russians came closer. The Ukrainian military moved into our area, and we never saw any fighting. But certainly, we heard lots of artillery, there were anti-aircraft missiles, and after, I think, 4 days, we decided that no, it's probably time to get out of there. So we went to, ultimately, Poland, and we were lucky enough to have friends in Denver, Colorado, where I could send my wife and my daughter. But then I'm a journalist, I have work, the work is here, so I got back in the car, we were with our cat, and my cat and we went back to Kyiv.
In your life, you have this unique experience of working for OSCE and actually going to the occupied territories, occupied by Russians territories, earlier in Donbas. What can you tell us about the atmosphere, how the situation was changing there? Let me remind that Russia occupied the part of Ukrainian Donbas in 2014.
We also sometimes talk to the soldiers in the occupied territories. Some of them clearly were Russian officers, Russian soldiers. Some of them seemed to be fairly professional. Some of them seemed to be like mercenaries. And some of them seemed to be like men who just felt that the best way to make money was to pick up a gun and fight whoever they get told. They were polite to us in general, not always. They didn't like us because they felt that we would give away their positions. We didn't. That was part of our job. But they thought that that we would. And in general, they weren't very present. Well, you didn't see them every single minute of the day, but you always knew that they were there. And the occupation was continuous. There was never a feeling on that side that you're in normal Ukraine, where there's freedom of speech and, the grievance and that kind of thing.
When Russia occupies territories of the neighboring countries, Moscow usually says that it tries to release the territories and to make the life of people on those territories better. Have you noticed anything like this?
Well, I wasn't everywhere, of course, but certainly no. It very quickly became clear that economically, in general, the life was better. But you can look at facts that everybody can confirm, and in those days, one of the things that you could always see is that there would be supermarkets on the Ukrainian side. And people would cross from the DPR side and go to the Ukrainian side to buy food in the Ukrainian supermarkets, in the ATB, for instance. And then they would take it back because the food choice was better on the Ukrainian side. I wouldn't say that they were pro-Russian. I would say that they were pro their own personal life, and they had people with guns in charge of where they were, and they felt that their best move was to not challenge those people with guns. villagers don't have guns. And we went to a village that was a Greek village, and we started talking to some people, and a couple of local men with guns walked up, and this conversation was going on in Russian. And immediately the locals became very quiet and careful about what they were saying, until the Greek man who was in our group started talking to one of the other villagers in Greek, which obviously the soldiers didn't understand. And they had a big conversation. And there was a lot of information about the real situation exchanged, because that conversation was taking place in a language that the people with the guns couldn't understand.
And what did they say?
I have to remember, but generally they said that the situation is not so good. We are not attacked by the soldiers all the time, but it's economically very difficult, and we would prefer to be left alone. There was very little small business. It seemed like not many people had jobs. And it seemed like most of the people who were capable of working.
You also mentioned that you've been to Mariupol. Mariupol today is one of the hottest spots, and actually it's fully surrounded by Russians. And it's a big goal for Russians to get this city, which used to be a home for around 400,000 of people. What can you say about Mariupol? Why is it so strategic goal for Russians? And what do you remember about situation on the ground?
Well, from the strategic side, I won't tell you anything that many other people haven't already said. It's an important port. It's a main way for the industry there to export product like steel. It's an important way for grain to go out, used to be. And of course, it's a main way for imports to go in. And the impression was that if there was a peace with no occupied territories, simply peaceful Ukraine, that it would absolutely be a city with the future. The center has nice buildings that sort of from the Stalin period, and a few even from the revolutionary period.
Used to have, I think.
Had. Of course, it seems all to be completely destroyed now, like Aleppo. They're going to have to, I think, build it from the ground zero, I think. Why it's so important? Well, beyond just the economic side, I think that everybody will say that yes, and if a Kremlin goal is to establish a land bridge from southwestern Russia, so the Rostov province, to Crimea, then it is pretty much impossible to have a land bridge, which is a road, you can drive it, to Crimea, unless Mariupol is in Russian hands. And that probably is one of the main reasons driving the Russian offensive on Mariupol right now.
And we've got a lot of reports from intelligence and from media that many Westerners, they believe that Ukraine will fall in a few days or even few hours. But here we are, closing, approaching to 2 months of this war, and we had a lot of victories here. We didn't give up. We didn't give up our capital. Our president was staying and uniting the people and uniting the whole civilized world around Ukraine. We have recaptured a lot of our towns, and we're still keeping fighting. What is the main reason of the strength of Ukrainian people? Why are we standing and fighting here?
Well, I think that nobody in Ukraine will say that there is any other answer except for the Ukrainian army. I think that it's absolutely clear that not only did the Russian army turn out not to be as capable as many Western analysts thought it was, but the Ukrainian army, and of course backed by the Ukrainian people, turned out to be much, much more effective. We saw that in 2014 and 2015, they were a little bit scared, they were a little bit careful. They've learned. You look at how they use their artillery. Again, they really do know what they're doing. And they have a good understanding of their enemy, their opponent, the Russian army. And they have developed tactics to harm the Russian army very effectively. I think that many Western analysts would have done better to look more at the Ukrainian military and less at the Russian military. And then they could have gotten a better prediction on how the Russian attack would come. For me personally, I was sure that the Russian attack wouldn't come because I knew that the Ukrainians had received so many anti-tank missiles from the Americans and the Estonians and so on, that it would be impossible for the Russian army, in the size that it was, to go into major Ukrainian cities, simply because the Ukrainians had too many of these missiles. It was not going to be possible. And I thought that the Russian army would just understand that and not attack. Well, I was wrong, obviously, about what the Russian army would do. But as it has turned out, if you try and attack an army in towns and villages and forests and areas where there's places for infantry to hide, and that infantry has a lot of anti-tank missiles, then your army is not going to advance. Or if they do advance, it's only going to be with very heavy losses. And that's something that the Russian army seems to be continuing to learn, because they made these big armored attacks at the beginning of the war, and they seem to still be doing it right now. And they don't seem to be learning that their opponent, the Ukrainian army, is a very serious opponent that really knows what it's doing, and they're going to fight. And they're not going to, I think they're not going to quit. I don't think that the Ukrainians will stop fighting forever until the Russians leave their territory. That's the way it looks to me. I don't think that fact has gotten to the decision makers in the Kremlin, and I think that that's one of the reasons why the war is continuing. But it's not going to change. The Ukrainians will fight, and they won't just fight. And it seems like the Russian army is taking very heavy casualties. But those casualties are being concealed from the Russian people. Now, some of that information cannot be stopped, and it's probable that the Russian intellectual class is well aware of what's going on. But those are not the ones who are going to be sending people to fight. It'll be, the poor people from, Krasnodarsky Krai and Dальний Vostok and Buryatia. Those are the ones who are going to be trying to fill the Russian army. Now, there's a limit, of course. You can, at a certain point, any army will start falling apart if it takes too many casualties. Any country, any society will start resisting a war if too many of its sons are killed. Where is that line in Russia? I don't know. I do know, however, that what stopped the Afghanistan war, effectively, what stopped that war was mothers of killed soldiers protesting against the Soviet involvement in Afghanistan. And they were essentially saying, our sons are dying for no good reason, stop the war. Maybe there is a point in the Russian society where the Russian society will react. Where that is, I don't know. I don't think that anybody knows. And there's another side to it, and that is that Russia looks like a perfect pyramid of power, but obviously inside of it are different power groupings. And you have the military, which is, it seems like, suffering very heavy casualties and being involved in an operation where it's basically, it's hard to say that it's being successful. If enough people within the Russian military, officers, get fed up with being part of an operation that gets soldiers killed, people are people, and pressures will build. Plus, at the same time, you have people's living standards deteriorating in Russia. So, all of these things taken together, you have to ask the question, how long can Russia sustain this unsuccessful war? And all I can say is, I know that it's not forever. And I also, it seems to me like the Ukrainians are willing to fight forever, and it also seems like the West is willing to sustain that fight for a long time. So at some point, it seems to me like a break should come.
Stefan, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experience with the Kyiv Post audience.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So we had a conversation with Stefan Korshak, a journalist who used to serve in the OSCE and used to spend 4 years in Donbas, which partially used to be occupied by Russia. Thank you for being with us.